We are taking this session with the first very interesting topic, that is the scientific basis of pre- and perinatal psychology. The speaker for this session is international acclaimed academician, scholar, Dr. Thomas Verny. Dr. Thomas Verny, it is indeed my pleasure and privilege to give a brief introduction of this highly intellectual personality. Thomas Verny is a psychiatrist, writer, and academician. He has previously taught at Harvard University, University of Toronto, York University, Toronto, St. Mary's University, and so many international acclaimed institutions. In 1981, he wrote his second book, The Secret Life of Unborn Child, which has become an international bestseller published in 27 countries. The Secret Life has changed the pregnancy and childbirth experience for millions of mothers and fathers too. In 1983, when he founded a Pre- and Perinatal Psychology Association for North America and served as its president for 8 years. In 1986, he launched the Association of Journal, which he edited from its inception until 1990, and in 2013, he became once again editor-in-chief of the Journal of JOPPPAH. In fact, there are so many things, I don't know what to say and what not to say. So I'm editing for you with your kind permission, sir. He edited, in addition to 8 books, when he is author and co-author for more than 50 scientific papers and articles. Verny's books, professional publications, and founding of PPPANA and Pre- and Perinatal Journal have established him as one of the world's leading authorities on the effect of perinatal and postnatal environment on personality development. In 2004, Mothering Magazine, in recognition of Verny's contribution to the field of parenting and child rearing, named him one of their living treasures. In 2005, Santa Barbara Graduate Institution bestowed on Verny's Doctorate of Humane Letters. So with these few words, with your kind permission, sir, I know I have edited a lot of things, but I'm sure when he speaks, you'll be all mesmerized. With these few words, I hand over this podium to sir. Technical.
Oh, test it. Okay, I'm testing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
On behalf of all of this,
Thank you.
welcome, sir.
Thank you. This is all mine now.
Yes, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you. It's not moving. Oh, okay. Good morning. I just want to say that it is truly a great honor and a privilege for me to spend some time with such an enthusiastic, interested, and may I say, spiritual congregation. My wife and I only arrived yesterday, but we have been very impressed by what you're doing here. And I hope that from here it goes further and further out into the world, and perhaps one of these days it might even come to Canada. So I would like to speak today about the scientific basis of pre- and perinatal psychology. And so, okay, it's jumping, sorry. Okay, why is it not up there? There we go. So first of all, what is pre- and perinatal psychology? It's a large subject, but I shall try to define it very, very closely and accurately. So pre- and perinatal psychology explores and elucidates all aspects of early human development. And when I say early, I mean from conception, through infancy, based on genetics, neurobiology, psychology, and sociology. In that sense, it is a theory and practice that is unified, holistic, longitudinal, and contextual. And so I want to go with you over 8 basic concepts that underlie pre- and perinatal psychology as I understand it. This is not an official statement, but I guess it's about as official as it will get. Life is a continuum from conception to death. And in these parts, perhaps it goes beyond death. A person's life does not begin at birth, which is such a common misconception. There is a very large association in the United States which is called 0 to 6. And by 0 to 3? Okay. Obviously, I'm not involved with that. 0 to 3 and 0 to them is birth. And you and I know that that child that is born at the age of 9 months after conception is not 0. Secondly, and this is important, there is no separation between the mind and the body. They are one. Whatever changes occur in the mind will occur in the body, and vice versa. When a woman is pregnant, this principle of unity may be extended to her child in utero. Point number 3, how humans develop and how they learn depends on the dynamic interplay between nature, that is an individual's genetic endowment, and nurture, that is nutrition, surroundings, care, stimulation, and teaching that are provided or not provided, because a lack of these will also, and perhaps even more, affect the unborn child. Point number 4, the brain is sensitive to experience throughout life, but experience during the critical periods of prenatal and early postnatal life organizes the brain. And this quote is from Bruce Perry. I don't know whether you can see this or not. Bruce Perry is a very famous doctor in the United States. And I really love this sentence. Experience is the chief architect of the brain. Whatever the child experiences, it molds and shapes the brain. And so, brain is sensitive to experience throughout life, but experience during the early prenatal and postnatal life organizes the brain. Number 5, the prenatal and early postnatal stages determine, to a very large extent, our biological and psychological makeup. That is, medical conditions, and I will talk more about this in a few minutes. Medical conditions, immune system, reactions to stress, as well as personality and ability to relate to others and to love and care about others. All of these take their first development in the prenatal period. Number 6, It follows that prenatal and early postnatal stages provide a unique and best opportunity for the primary prevention of biological and psychological disorders. In many places, children begin to act up, children begin to misbehave, in quotation marks, at the age of 2 or 3. And that is when the school system becomes interested in them. That's when parents perhaps take their child to a doctor or perhaps even a psychologist. And that often is referred to as primary prevention. That is not primary prevention. At best, that's secondary prevention because it is too late. The time to do primary prevention is prenatally. After that, some of the harm already has been done. Number 7, a secure relationship with 1 or 2 primary caregivers, preferably the parents of the child, maximizes the acquisition of emotional and cognitive skills. So essentially, this is about bonding and attachment. And we shall speak about that on Sunday morning when I will give a lecture focused just on bonding and attachment. And finally, if you can get to finally, come on, there we are. The mother, according to pre- and perinatal psychology principles, the mother is not just a passive receptacle or an incubator for a child's growth, which is how she was looked upon in the past, but rather an active initiator and participant. So, the question arises, how do we gain knowledge of the unborn child? What sort of windows into the womb can we detect? And so one of the ways, of course, is very simple, direct observation. And so I have a pointer. We have such things as optic fibers, amniocentesis, ultrasound, electroencephalogram in utero can be done, fetal electroencephalograms. What is least invasive is taking cortisol samples from the saliva. We can do CT scans, MRIs, and PET scans. And I'm sure you're all familiar with those. Just want to play you this. Do I just push on it and it will play? Okay. Audio. It's a 30-second video that was filmed in Italy. Oops, no. Yeah, okay. Make it as loud as possible. We'll play it again. Play it again. Okay, this is a baby in utero being filmed.
Basta! Mi hai stufato! Non ti sopporto più!
Non urlare, smettila!
Insomma, basta! Basta!
Quando un bambino nasce, ha già un passato. Siete voi, non dimenticatelo, perché 9 mesi valgono una vita.
Okay, what that movie is trying to show you, it's kind of difficult in a large hallway like this. What it tries to show you is that the baby is lying in the womb, very calmly, relaxed, nice music is playing, and then suddenly the parents start arguing. And you can see how the baby reacts to it. So it is totally wrong to believe that babies in utero can't hear what is going on outside. They can hear it very well, and they react to it. This here is a PET scan, and you can see quite a difference between the left side and the right side. And so for those of you who have just come in, we are talking about how we can learn about the life of the unborn child. And these are some of the measures and some of the ways in which we can deduce, short of talking to the baby, what's really going on. Okay? So that was a PET scan, you have seen that. Now, neurobiology, of course, is another way of trying to find out what's going on. Research studies of various maternal and paternal environmental factors, such as nutrition, drugs, infections, pollution, etc. What effect do they have on the fetal brain anatomy, health, and personality? Research studies of various maternal and paternal emotional factors, such as stress, anxiety, depression. What effect do they have on brain anatomy, health, and personality? And we'll be talking about that in about half an hour. Neonatal physiology. So what can we learn about the physiology of the unborn children? For a long time, for example, it was believed that myelination, which is a fatty deposit on large nerve tracts, was not complete until about the age of 6. Well, actually, it's not complete until about 15 or 16. But nobody's going to tell you that a 15-year-old cannot hear or cannot act just because they don't have enough myelin tissue on their nerves. So that was a totally false belief, and it has been disproven many, many times. The main purpose of a myelin layer is to increase the speed of conduction. And when you have a tiny little baby, it doesn't need much speed. Fetal hearing has been looked into. Fetal thought has been looked into. And brain life has been looked into. For example, it's well known that babies by the age of 6 months after conception already have REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And rapid eye movement sleep in adults, as I'm sure all of you know, is associated with the state of dreaming. So if a 6-month-old child is dreaming, obviously he is using his brain for more than just reacting to the outside world. You might also ask yourself, well, what is it that a 6-month-old child can be dreaming about? Well, lots of things. That child dreams the same way you and I dream about our daily occurrences. So the child hears noises. Also from about the 6 months on, the child can suck its thumb. It can play with the umbilical cord. There are lots of things going on in the womb. So those are the things that that child would be dreaming about. We assume, because nobody has told us. REM sleep, I've already mentioned. Fetal ultrasounds, memory and learning. Now that is very, very interesting here. I will tell you a story. Anthony de Casper, over there. Oops, what happened? Okay. Anthony DeCaspar, a psychologist in the United States, made a very, very interesting experiment. He took, 12 mothers and put them into one group and put another 12 mothers into another group. And then he had them record a story, a very similar story, but not the same story. So group A got one story and group B got another story. When the children were born, he hooked them up to something which he called the suckometer. Suckometer. And what that suckometer consisted of was an empty baby bottle, which was hooked up to a computer which measured the number of times the baby would suck on the empty baby bottle. So a base level was established for the sucking. And then they were played two songs. The song that their mother played to them, not the song, sorry, the story. That's the next experiment. The song is the next experiment. The suckometer played the story that the child heard over the last 3 months, and then they also played the story that it never had heard before, but read by his own mother, but it was a new story. Well, to make it a little bit faster, within about 2 hours, each child learned to suck the bottle in such a way that he or she received the familiar story as opposed to the unfamiliar story. So what this very clearly, and this experiment was repeated with songs and other stories, what this experiment very clearly shows is that children remember what happened to them during their stay in the womb, because they preferred the familiar story to the unfamiliar story. Okay. So, moving on. Maternal language shapes infants' melodies. So this takes the previous experiment a little bit further. Crying sounds of neonates are very much in sync with the way their mothers speak. So again, it shows how the child in utero is constantly listening and learning, listening and learning. Now, clinical psychology, psychiatry. Adults, once in a while, through such things as psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, are able to uncover long forgotten memories. But usually, in a size like this room here, where I would imagine there are about 300 people, usually among 300 people, there would be at least 2 or 3 who have had lifetime memories. The mic is not on? Oh, I thought that somebody said the mic was not on. So in a room like this, there probably are 2 or 3 people, 1 per 100, who have all their lives remembered something that happened to them, either at the time of birth or even pre-birth, just normally, without hypnotherapy, without drugs, without anything. But if you do use hypnotherapy or certain drugs like LSD, psilocybin, very often people are able to regress back to very early stages in their development and accurately remember what happened to them. And I could talk about that all day, but we don't have all day, so we have to move on. I want to move on, and it doesn't want to move on. Can you push it to the next slide, please? Okay. So, just a very, very, very quick look at embryology and embryology and psychology, how we combine them. Here you have okay. This here shows you several spermatozoa, sperm cells, still in the testicle. These fine fibers that you see here they supply nutrition to each one of these sperm cells. Here is one sperm. As you can see, it is made up of 3 parts: the head, the body, and the tail. You don't see quite the tail. At the end of the tail, there is a little outpouching, a little tail. It's called a flagellum. And this little tail at the end propels the spermatozoa, the sperm cell, forward. What is very interesting is that in the head, which is where all the genetic material is contained, but right at the beginning of the head, there is a substance which sort of acts like a dynamo. And when it hits the ovum, which you will see in a second, it actually helps the sperm to get into the ovum. Well, let's have a look at that. So here you have approximately 300,000 spermatozoa swim upstream after sexual encounter. And you may very well ask, well, why do we need 300,000? All we need is one healthy sperm, right? Why do you need 300,000? Well, the reason that you need 300,000 because many of them are not normally developed. Some of them have 2 heads, some of them have 2 tails, and also very often, being male, they get lost. Here you have, I think I'm on safe grounds here because there are more women than men here. Here you have an ovum. The ovum is the only cell in the body that is actually visible to the naked eye. Okay? It is as large as a dot on a printed page. It's the only visible cell. And like all eggs, it also contains yolk. This here is a yolk sac, and that helps to nourish the ovum after it gets fertilized. The ovum will die in 24 hours unless it is fertilized. And here you have the moment, you see, you only have very few sperm left behind. You no longer have 300,000, perhaps you have 20 or 30. And they're all trying to persuade the ovum to let them in. Please, please, let me in. And now, according to most recent research, and this is really very interesting from a psychological and perhaps even spiritual standpoint, recent research seems to, whoops, what happened? I have it here, but something's happened there. Okay, good. Recent research seems to indicate that the ovum, the walls of the ovum actually open and invite one of the sperm in. Now, we don't understand how that happens, but whereas in the past, it was thought that the sperm kind of drives itself into the ovum. Now it seems much more of a dance, okay? The ovum likes this particular sperm and invites it in. I can't say much more about that. It's something that we'll have to learn about in the future. And here you have Here you have the moment of conception, okay? This is the sperm driving right down into the ovum. Now, here we have a few hours after conception when already two cells have formed. One cell here and one cell here. And here we have, oops, sorry. And just one back. Okay, so a few hours later, the two cells become 4. And then the 4 become 8, the 8 becomes 16. And they grow very, very quickly. And this happens in the oviduct. Okay, and this stage, this is a 3-day-old human embryo, is called a morula, which is Latin for raspberry. Thank you. Who is the Latin student here? Okay, so the raspberry, here we come. Morula in the fallopian tube. After 3 days, there are 16 to 32 cells. 4 days, 60 to 70 cells. By 5 days, you have 150 cells, and then it's called a blastula. And this is the part that I wanted you to see. We are not going to go through the whole development. We are going to stop right here. These are called villi, chorionic villi. And villi, villus, comes from the Latin finger, finger-like. So these finger-like projections come from the baby. Very, very important. This is part of the baby's skin. And it helps the baby take root, usually in the posterior wall of the uterus. And so that's usually after about 10 days. And then it embeds itself usually in the posterior wall of the uterus. Now, from a psychological standpoint, this is a very, very important stage in human development because I don't know what your experience has been, but certainly to me it came as a surprise, is that there are actually people, not many, but there are a few people who, without any knowledge of the biology here, are able to remember they will have dreams in which they try to hold on to a crumbling wall. And trying very often in life to get, let's say, to get into a club where they are not wanted, or to get into a school with great difficulty. And many of these sort of underlying, what one would call sort of underlying, what's the word I'm looking for? Scripts. It's almost like a film script that tells you what to do. And so one of the problems with chorionic villi and getting sort of a hold and embed yourself in the endometrium is that you see half of the genes of this baby, you can't really call it a baby, but it's the beginnings of a baby, this blastula. Half of the genes come from the father, and half come from the mother. But this is the mother's body. And so the mother's body immediately recognizes that there is a foreign substance here. And what do we do with a foreign substance? We try to extrude it. We try to get rid of it. So you have a huge immune response when this chorionic villi or villus tries to make its way into the uterine wall. So there is this battle between the new being that's trying to establish itself, which may carry over into the rest of that person's life, or they get killed. They get actually done with. And so we believe that perhaps as much as 50% of children conceived undergo a natural abortion because of this immune response. So I want to talk now about something totally different, because what we are trying to do here, what I'm trying to do here, is to give you an overview of some of the important research that has been done in the pre and perinatal area. So just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because I only have 45 minutes, and I'm running out of that. Okay, so we'll talk about environmental toxins. And of course, the main one is stress. And stress really is a very, very negative force in our lives. And so you have stress, and you have other actions that happen around stress. Oops. Okay, so what you have, some of the causes of stress are birth complications, environmental toxins, general anxiety, depression, undernutrition, smoking, alcohol, and all kinds of other substances, and birth complications. Now, we shall not talk about all of them, but this is, generally speaking, what we are looking for in terms of stress. Now, what is very, very important is that chemicals that are contained lead, mercury, organophosphates, pesticides, phthalates, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. I will mention all of these in greater detail. But it is said that 98% of pregnant women have detectable levels of 62 chemicals in their bodies out of 163 screened. So imagine every pregnant woman in the United States is running around with at least 62 chemicals in her body, and very often much more. Now, there's no way that all those chemicals can be good for the baby, of course. Now, one of the most frequent chemicals that all of us drink is contained in these plastic bottles, and it's called bisphenol A. And pregnant women are being warned to avoid eating canned foods and foods microwaved in plastic containers, as well as drinking from water bottles left out in the sun. Because according to new findings from Stanford University, high levels of BPA, a chemical in many plastics and canned food linings, can increase the risk of miscarriage in women who are already prone to miscarriages or otherwise have trouble getting pregnant. Now, another common source of toxin is car pollution. It has been found that kids have lower IQ scores in areas where there is prenatal pollution. Here is a study from Manhattan in New York, a study of 249 women who wore backpack air monitors for 48 hours during the last few months of pregnancy in low-income neighborhoods in northern Manhattan and the South Bronx. They had varying levels of exposure to typical kinds of urban air pollution, mostly from car, bus, and truck exhaust. The study took into account other factors, such as exposure to secondhand smoke, mother's education. The major source of air pollution was traffic, particularly diesel. along with other environmental harms. Disadvantaged, low-income children are exposed to. It could help explain why they often do worse academically than children from wealthier families. Children growing up in poor families have many, many disadvantages, and we don't have time to go into that, but it is certainly something that you here are exposed to and perhaps can do something about. Low-income families usually speak less to their children. Instead of explaining things to them, you can't touch that because it will burn your fingers. They tend to give commands. Don't touch that. Do you know what's going to happen to you if you touch that? So a lot of warnings, a lot of commands instead of explanations. Also, 10 minutes left. My God, I just started. Oh my. Okay. What are we going to do here? Okay, we're going to skip obviously something.
Please continue. Please take your own time. That is what the audience says. Please continue.
Do you want more?
Yes. Yes.
That's good. All right. A little more time then.
One slide before this.
Okay. I want to talk about C-sections. No, we won't have time, really. Sorry. There. Come on. It's just moving on its own. I'm not doing anything. I didn't know I had such magical fingers. Okay, C-section and babies, very, very important. Very few people know about this. The founding populations of microbes, which are found on C-section infants, are not those selected by hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. Babies born by C-section harbor bacterial communities found on skin, because of course that's where they came out from, right? Babies born by C-section harbor bacterial communities found on skin, dominated by Staphylococcus and similar bacteria. Their gastrointestinal tracts were not colonized by their mother's lactobacilli, which is what would have happened if they had just born normally vaginally. Women in labor routinely also get antibiotics to ward off infection after C-section. Antibiotics are also used to prevent a serious infection in newborns caused by group B strep. Women of reproductive age carry bacteria, primarily lactobacilli, which make the vaginal canal more acidic. This environment provides a hardy defense against dangerous bacteria that are sensitive to acid. Whether the birth is fast or slow, the formerly germ-free baby soon comes into contact with the lactobacilli if it is born vaginally. The first fluids a baby sucks contains its mother's microbes. Once born, the baby instinctively reaches his mouth, now full of lactobacilli, towards his mother's nipple and begins to suck. So you see how nature has provided for a perfect kind of a transfer between the internal, the vagina, the uterus of the mother and the outside world. We, obstetricians mostly, but some general practitioners also, interfere with that natural process. And so those people advise mothers, why can't you come in this weekend to the hospital? We'll put you to sleep. We'll do a C-section. You won't even know you had a baby. Not a good idea. You should know that you had a baby. And the baby should know you. Okay. You all know about antidepressants, SSRIs, and they may tend to raise obesity and diabetes risk. You know that more and more people in North America suffer of diabetes. And one of the causes may very well be the fact that a lot of women are depressed while they are pregnant, and they take antidepressants, and that goes into the bloodstream of the baby, and it creates diabetes and similar conditions. Okay, we're just going to skip that. Okay, sorry, just skipping some stuff here. Okay, so this is really the most important part. What is the effect of maternal stress on the fetal brain? This is very, very important, and I really appreciate having a little more time on this. There will be two slides that I will show you now. This one and the next one. If you forget everything that I have told you, please remember this. This is a cross-section of the brain. Neurons, as the baby grows, neurons start in the middle and from the neuronal tube. And then gradually they move up to what later becomes the cerebral hemispheres. Now, this is truly fascinating. Let's assume that you have a neuron which we shall call A. Neuron A is genetically programmed to end up here, which we shall call point B. If the baby's mother is exposed to a lot of stress, if she indulges in what is usually referred to as recreational drugs, such as opium or even marijuana, nicotine, any of those substances interfere with the travel itinerary of our little neuron that's supposed to go from A to B. And what happens is that instead of going from A to B, this neuron might only go up to here, to C. If you multiply that by thousands and thousands and thousands, you can see how this baby's brain may become totally miswired. Okay? We have here not a software problem. We have a hardcore problem. Okay? This is the way this child is being set up, and so it will be born already with an imperfect brain, okay? So that's the hardwiring. The hardwiring changes as a result of stress, and that is one of the major problems that we are facing today. So remember this. Many doctors, psychiatrists believe that autism, I'm sure you're familiar with this, is a developmental disconnection syndrome. There are either too many connections or too few connections between different parts of the brain. So again, this is hardwiring of the brain, and it's bad. Okay, I just want to go to the next stress level. Okay, as you know, this is just for those of you who don't have medical education. As you know, nerves don't actually touch, okay? A long nerve fiber, which is called an axon, comes close to another neuron, which is a dendrite, little hair-like projections, but they don't touch. There is a tiny little gap between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of the other. And this very close area is called a synerge, okay? So I'm sure that many of you, perhaps all of you, have heard of Prozac Antidepressant. What Prozac does, you see, is that it gets into one of these areas where serotonin is supposed to be coming in. And it takes the place of serotonin in this little harbor, you might say, or a docking station in space. And so the serotonin, which collects here in the interval, in the open space between one nerve and another, is not absorbed by the next nerve. And so you have more serotonin in the brain. And one of the common hypotheses of depression, I don't totally subscribe to it, but it seems to apply in some cases, is that you don't have enough serotonin. There's a lack of serotonin in the brain. So Prozac increases the serotonin level in the brain by not allowing the serotonin to be absorbed as it usually would by some of the other neurons. This is what nerves actually look like. And okay, and we have two kinds of stress responses. We have a rapid response, which is the fight-flight response. Very, very old. Almost all the vertebrate animals have that. And what it does is it activates the sympathetic system, and it deactivates the parasympathetic system. So there will be inhibition of eating and sleeping. Then there is another response, which is the slower response, and that has to do with the HPA axis, and it increases cortisol. The HPA axis, yes. Okay, so what we have here is a cross-section of the brain very, very quickly, but I just want you to, I just want you to see here, this is the hippocampus, we'll be talking about that. This is the hypothalamus. These are the cerebral hemispheres up here. Okay? And here is the amygdala, which we shall also talk about in a second. And here's the cerebellum, which is sort of like a small brain in the back of the brain. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I told you there are two slides I want you to remember. This is the second one. This is incredibly important. What happens under stress is that if we look, this here is the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is a small gland which sits on top of the kidneys. Very, very important gland. It produces, inside it produces epinephrine, and on the outside it produces corticoids. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay. In the United States, there is a very well-known professor, and he wrote a book which is called Why Giraffes Don't Get Ulcers. It's a very good book. And I will explain to you why giraffes don't get ulcers, but you and I do. When, for example, a person is crossing the street and suddenly a bus is coming right at them, they get scared, they start running, their blood pressure increases, the whole body goes into a panic mood, okay? And this is what happens. Here is a person walking over the street. Suddenly they see a bus, okay? And so sensory thalamus, in other words, the seeing, the eye, the ears that are listening to the bus, perhaps even the nose that smells the fumes from the bus, all of those things impact the person. And so all these stimuli from the outside world go to the cortex, okay? So your higher brain centers, right? Also, it goes to the amygdala. And the amygdala then, which is a small area at the tip of the hippocampus, the amygdala sends signals. See the positive here? The amygdala sends signals to the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus and tells the hypothalamus to produce CRF, which then goes to the pituitary, which then produces ACTH, which then goes to the adrenal cortex, and the adrenal cortex, as the word already says, cortex, outside, the adrenal cortex then produces cortisone. The cortisone goes back to the amygdala and it goes back to the hippocampus. When it hits the hippocampus says, oh, there is enough cortisone in the blood. Let's shut down this whole HPA stress response. And so it is sort of like a thermostat in your room. When it's set for 70 degrees, the moment the room becomes 70 degrees, the furnace stops functioning until it drops down to 68 or 65, and then it starts again. Well, it's a little bit like that. But since we are not giraffes, we worry. And when a woman is pregnant and she starts worrying, perhaps she doesn't want, perhaps she has some doubts about having the child. Perhaps she's thinking of giving it up for adoption. Perhaps she has just lost a job. Whatever it is, she starts worrying. And her worries go to the amygdala. And the amygdala receives signals which say, we are in a stress condition. What can I do? I have to tell the hypothalamus to produce more cortisone. So the reason giraffes don't get ulcers is because they don't worry. We humans worry a lot. And every time you worry, you start this stress axis and it goes into overdrive. And the problem is that if a woman worries throughout her pregnancy, oops, can I just have the previous slide, previous to this? That one, yeah. When a woman worries, the stress response is a fight-flight response. And one of the major things it does is it takes the blood from inside the body, which would be like the intestines, and pushes them into the arms and the legs so that you could better run or fight. Makes perfect sense. But it also takes blood away from the uterus. And so for the time that this woman is stressed, her baby is not receiving the full amount of blood that it should. And therefore, that baby is going to be, if this continues, smaller and less developed than the baby of another woman who is not like that. Can I have 10 more minutes? Okay. Because there are a few things that I would really like to show you. So what are the effects of stress on the unborn? That's what I wanted to tell you about. Okay, there are about 17 different things that happen to the unborn when the mother is under stress. And so the first one is gene regulation. Genes are affected by stress, and you will be having lectures on genetics and epigenetics in the next few days. You'll learn more about that. But one of the things that happens is that you have gene regulation. And there will be cell migration to the wrong destination, formation of wrong circuits. I told you about that. Also, if there is too much nicotine or too much other factors, it will actually lead to the destruction of neurons, which then, of course, leads to the destruction of synapses. Next. Okay, you can see the difference. These are dendrites in one animal, and this is an animal that has been under stress. Not really too much stress, just some competition. And you can see how many fewer dendrites this particular animal has. Next, please. Okay, it decreases brain corticosteroid receptors, which means, often you hear the saying that stress builds character. Well, not true, not true. Stress makes you only weaker. And it makes you weaker on a very, very important area, which is the brain corticosteroid receptors. Okay, next please. Okay, this here is the corpus callosum. It's a bridge between the two sides of the brain. And I thought that you would be interested in this. Next. Because stress inhibits the development of the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is one of the major areas where there are anatomical differences between men and women. Women have larger corpus callosum, on the average, than men, which is one of the reasons that women actually, speaking anatomically, are different from men. Because of the larger corpus callosum, and I will show you in a minute that, because of the larger corpus callosum, women think with both sides of the brain. Oh, you know where this is going, do you? Men tend to think with only one part, usually the left brain. So men are more analytic, men are more focused on narrow areas. Whereas a woman would take in the whole classroom here, I can only see my wife and nobody else. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next. Okay, it increases, somebody asked about congenital malformation. Stress also increases congenital malformations. You get more cleft lip, cleft palate, and spina bifida. And this is brand new. The idea of telomeres is probably about 10, 15 years old. Telomeres really decide how fast your cells are aging. And the shorter the telomeres, the less time the cells have to survive. Next slide, please. Okay, health effects of maternal stress. We are just going to review that. Okay, next. So, okay, next, we'll just skip that. Skip. Okay, effect of prenatal stress on physical health. Excessive and sustained, and this is important. It's not when you have to run after a bus or run after a streetcar that causes negative stress. It has to be excessive and sustained for a long time, like several days or weeks, not a few minutes. So these are some of the things that happen, and we are all suffering because of this. We have low birth weight, prematurity, congenital malformations, SIDS, serotonin defects in the brain, heart disease, hypertension, cancer. All of these things can be caused by stress. Then, of course, you have obesity, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, inhibition of the immune system, very, very serious, decreased ability to deal with stress, premature aging. We have already mentioned that. Next, please. Oh, exhaustion of the adrenals, and this can very often lead to overcharged immune system, increases congenital malformations. Okay, let's go to the end, almost to the end, okay? Keep going to, let's go to mode of birth and suicide. We'll end on a positive note. Next, okay, so this is very interesting. This research came from Sweden, and it was by Bertil Jakobsson from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And he found that those who asphyxiated themselves by hanging, drowning, or gas poisoning were 4 times more likely than controls to have suffered oxygen deprivation at birth. Interesting, isn't it? Mechanical means of suicide related to forceps delivery. And drug addiction related to mothers receiving opiates, barbiturates, or chloroform during delivery. So whatever happens to you at an early stage, in more than one way, affects you for the rest of your life. This is the important idea that I would like you to take with you after this. Next. Okay, so in summary, points to remember. Psychological stress during pregnancy produces lasting, undesirable changes in both mothers and their children. The cumulative impact, so it's not just one thing, but one thing after another. The cumulative impact of health risks from modest dysregulations, they don't have to be huge, in multiple systems can be substantial, even if they individually have minimal and insignificant health effects. In the brain, hardware and software is constantly changing as a result of the dynamic interaction between genes and the environment. For a long time, people thought that your destiny was in your genes. Today, we know much, much better. It's in the genes which are expressed at any one time. In other words, the ones that are vital and working. And 4, experience changes the organization and function of the brain. Human connections create neural connections from which the mind emerges. Thank you.
I think the big round of applause for excellent presentation. And I know that we couldn't manage with the time and we should have given a little more time. I apologize for that. We are looking forward in future to hear a lot of good things from you.